Chapter 1. The Stain of Silk. The rain in Lower Dust Bowl wasn't a gentle weeping. It was a gritty, insistent assault. It hammered against corrugated iron roofs, smeared the perpetually damp cobblestones, and clung to the perpetually stained overalls of the factory workers who bled out their days in the grimy heart of the city. It also, tonight, clung to Ethan Vance's skin, a cold, greasy film of soot and despair. Ethan Vance wasn't supposed to be here. He was the heir to the Vance Loom-Guild, a dynasty built on the mastery of weave armor, the impossibly resilient, bulletproof silk that formed the protective sheen of the world's most powerful. His grandfather, Silas Vance, had perfected the process, locking away the secret of manipulating the very structure of silk at a molecular level, creating a fabric denser than steel and lighter than air. The guild controlled the supply, a stranglehold on defense contracts, corporate security, and, increasingly, the wardrobes of the elite. But the boardrooms, the endless simulations, the suffocating expectations, they had all become a vibrant, sickening shade of gray. Ethan found himself a prisoner in a gilded cage, a master craftsman, adrift in a sea of vapid ambition. So, Head traded his bespoke suit for a threadbare tunic, his polished shoes for patched-up boots, and his inherited fortune for a handful of copper credits. He was, for all intents and purposes, a laundry boy. His current task was a particularly unpleasant one, scrubbing the grease-stained denim of Foreman Grunt, a brute of a man whose vocabulary seemed to consist primarily of grunts and threats. The air hung thick with the stench of machine oil, the metallic tang of burning solder, and the pervasive odor of exhaustion. Ethan moved with a practiced silence, his movements economical, honed by years of disciplined training, disguised by the monotonous repetition of the work. He was a ghost in the machine, a shadow amongst the sweating masses. He didn't speak. The guild had forbidden it, a rule born of paranoia, and the knowledge that a truly brilliant mind, untamed, could be a dangerous weapon. Head lost his voice years ago, a consequence of a particularly brutal sparring session with his father, a moment etched in his memory like a searing brand. The city itself was a monstrous patchwork of industry and poverty, a labyrinth of narrow alleys and towering foundries built within the skeletal remains of the original, ancient capital. Below the surface of Lower Dust Bowl lay the Undercity, a network of tunnels and forgotten machinery, rumored to be the birthplace of the knit pulse the forbidden martial art had inherited from his grandfather. It was a style that didn't rely on brute strength, but on a subtle, terrifying manipulation of fabric tension, a whisper of energy, a shift in the weave, and an enemy's own clothing could become their prison. Tonight, however, the usual grime felt different, charged with a low hum of tension. It started with Jax Mercer, Warden Mercer's son, a spoiled, arrogant youth obsessed with demonstrating his power. Jack's enforcers were a visible threat, lean, heavily armed men who patrolled the market district with a casual brutality. Tonight, Jax was making a show of it, tossing muddy boots into Ethan's washbasins, a deliberate act of humiliation. "Look at this, boys." Jack's voice, amplified by a distorted speaker, crackled through the din. "The people who wash the clothes are just the lint on the fabric of society. Worthless. Disposable." Ethan ignored him, meticulously scrubbing a particularly stubborn stain. Jax, seeing this as an invitation, grabbed a bucket of cold water and splashed it directly onto Ethan's hands, forcing him to yelp in surprise. Perhaps a little perspective, Vance. His enforcers, a pair of muscle-bound individuals, advanced towards him, their hands hovering near their vibroblades. Sleek, humming weapons designed to slice through almost anything. Just as they were about to seize him, a voice intervened. "Leave him be, Jax." It was Talia, the tailor. She emerged from a small, cramped workshop, a haven of quiet industry amidst the chaos. She was a woman of sharp angles and startling intelligence, her hands perpetually stained with dyes and thread. She carried herself with an air of quiet defiance, a stark contrast to Jack's swaggering arrogance. Talia offered Ethan a small, stale bread roll, a gesture of unexpected kindness that surprised him. "You're going to freeze," she said, her voice low and steady, "and your skin will burn. Best to keep a little warmth." Jack sneered. "Don't be so generous, old woman. As nothing but a scrub." Ethan continued to work, carefully folding the wet laundry sheet he was using to dry his hands. He was acutely aware of the danger he was in, of the simmering resentment in Jack's eyes. But something was different tonight. There was a particular precision to his movements, a subtle concentration that he hadn't felt in months. He was focusing, drawing on a reserve of energy, a faint tingling sensation that ran through his fingertips. It was the beginning of the tension state, the opening of the knit pulse. Chapter 2. The Loom of Shadows. The rain had stopped, leaving the megacity slick and reflecting the neon glow of the industrial district. Jax and his enforcers, hulking figures nicknamed Stonehands for their dense muscle and relentless pressure, continued to circle Ethan, a low, menacing hum radiating from their vibroblades. Ethan remained motionless, folding the damp linen with an almost surgical grace, the tingling in his fingertips intensifying. Talia, despite her small stature, stood her ground, a silent sentinel between him and the looming threat. Jax, fueled by adolescent cruelty and the intoxicating power of his father's influence, let out a grating laugh. "Still scrubbing, little cog? You're a marvel, really. Turning a simple sheet into a weapon. The irony isn't lost on me." He gestured with a dismissive wave of his hand. "The Mercer family built this city, boy. We weave the fabric of reality. You just wash it." Ethan didn't respond, his focus entirely inward. The air around him shimmered subtly, a distortion only visible to someone keenly observant. The rain-slicked linen he was handling seemed to absorb the ambient light, growing denser, almost opaque. Talia, noticing the shift, subtly tightened her grip on the bread roll, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She recognized the signs, the subtle pressure building within Ethan's body, the barely perceptible increase in the air's conductivity. Suddenly, Jack's enforcers lunged. They moved with brutal efficiency, their vibroblades aimed at Ethan's vulnerable throat. But before they could strike, the linen exploded. Not with a violent tear, but with a controlled, terrifying precision. A wall of solidified cloth, denser than any steel, erupted from the sheet, intercepting the blades with a resounding crack that echoed through the narrow alley. The stone hands were thrown backward, their armor dented, and their movements momentarily disrupted. The attack hadn't been a clash of weapons, it had been the annihilation of their tools. Ethan stood, breathing lightly, the linen returning to its normal state, leaving no trace of the impossible phenomenon. His eyes, normally a dull gray, held a flicker of intense blue, like chips of ice reflecting the city's neon dot. "Impressive," Jax murmured, his bravado momentarily shattered. You've got something, don't you?" This time, Ethan didn't ignore him. He took a deliberate step forward, his movements fluid and unnervingly silent. He picked up a discarded metal bucket, the kind used for carrying soapy water, and with a casual flick of his wrist, tightened the bucket's metal band to a point of excruciating tension. The metal screamed under the strain, bending and warping until it resembled a grotesque sculpture. Jax and his men recoiled, their faces etched with disbelief. The sheer force of the demonstration was unnerving, a visceral reminder of the power at Ethan's command. Talia, meanwhile, had moved swiftly, subtly positioning herself between Ethan and the stunned enforcers. "Jax," she said, her voice carrying a quiet steel, "you should know that sometimes the most valuable threads are hidden in the most unexpected places." As she spoke, she began to meticulously examine the twisted metal bucket. Her fingers danced over the warped metal, drawing lines and making manipulations. Ethan realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that she wasn't just observing, she was analyzing, understanding the intricacies of his power. "The loom pulse," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not about brute force. It's about control. About manipulating the very structure of matter through interwoven tension." Jax, regaining his composure, barked an order. "Eliminate the threat!" But before the enforcers could react, Ethan moved again. He grabbed a discarded length of hemp rope, the kind used for securing cargo. In a heartbeat, he twisted and manipulated the rope, tightening it not into a knot, but into an intricate interlocking lattice of unimaginable strength. The rope shimmered with the same blue light as his eyes, and as he held it, the air around him thickened, becoming almost solid. The effect was disorienting. Jax stumbled, his hand instinctively reaching for his vibroblade. As he brought it down, the rope lashed out, wrapping around his wrist with impossible speed. He cried out in surprise as the rope tightened, not to injure him, but to completely immobilize his hand, rendering the vibroblade useless. Ethan stared at Jax, his expression unreadable. "You see," he said, his voice low and controlled, "this isn't about destroying. It's about revealing the truth. About showing you that you're nothing but a knot in the fabric of power." Talia stepped forward, offering him a second, equally stale bread roll. "It's also about understanding the weakness in the weave," she added, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "And exploiting it." Chapter 3. The Geometry of Control. The air in the ruined market district hung thick with the acrid smell of burnt cotton and the stunned silence of the Mercer militia. "What's your?" 30 men, clad in the remnants of their reinforced uniforms, lay scattered like fallen dominoes, each frozen in a grotesque pose of startled agony, their armor straps fused to their limbs. The sheer efficiency of Ethan's attack hadn't just been terrifying, it was utterly incomprehensible. It defied logic, even the logic of combat. Jax, still clutching at his injured wrist, his face a mask of furious betrayal, was the first to break the silence. "Impossible," he spat, his voice ragged with disbelief. "A laundry boy? You wielded that like a weapon." Ethan, meticulously folding the hemp rope into a perfect miniature bias strip, a demonstration he seemed to indicate, didn't answer directly. "The fabric of reality is built on tension, Warden," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "Every thread, every fiber, exerts a force. It's a simple geometry, misunderstood by most." He snapped the bias strip in two, the two pieces spiraling into the dust. "I simply learned to understand it." The high chairwoman, Lady Vivian Vance, a woman whose steely gaze and impeccably tailored silk robes spoke of centuries of corporate dominance, stepped forward, her expression a carefully constructed blend of concern and calculated authority. "Ethan, my son, what have you done?" Her voice, amplified by a discreet microphone, carried across the wreckage. This is an unacceptable breach of protocol, an egregious display of unrestrained power." "It's a demonstration, Mother," Ethan replied, his eyes fixed on the chaotic scene. "A demonstration of the potential trapped within what you consider worthless. You built an empire on controlling this, on bending it to your will. I've merely perfected the technique." He began to systematically dismantle the remnants of Jack's vibroblade, not destroying it, but meticulously analyzing its construction. The stress points, the metal's molecular alignment, the precise angle of the energy conduit. It was a chilling display of methodical intelligence, a surgical dissection of a weapon. The remaining Mercer guards, initially frozen in shock, began to edge backward, their eyes darting between Ethan and his mother. Talia, who had been observing from a shadowed alleyway, approached cautiously. "The geometry is fascinating," she said, her voice thoughtful. "You're not just controlling the fabric, you're understanding its inherent vulnerabilities." The vibroblade was a linear attack, reliant on a single point of pressure. You disrupted that entirely. It's like a seamstress catching a needle before it can pierce a delicate fabric. Precisely, Ethan confirmed, turning his attention to her. He noticed the subtle curve of her brow, the thoughtful way she examined a shard of shattered vibroblade. The key is not brute force, but precision. It's about recognizing the weakest point and exploiting it with surgical accuracy. He gestured to a charred section of the market stall, where a thin strip of reinforced silk, a prototype of weave armor, lay partially melted. This silk is designed to withstand significant force. But look, the heat weakened the weave, creating a fissure. I simply amplified that fissure with controlled tension. He picked up a piece of the molten silk, manipulating it with his fingers, twisting and pulling it until it formed a perfect, glistening spiral. The loom pulse isn't just about manipulating fabric, he explained. It's about understanding and controlling energy, the energy inherent in every material. Jax, regaining a flicker of his former arrogance, attempted a strategic maneuver. You think you've won, Vance? This is a show of force, nothing more. We have resources. We have loyalty. We will crush you. He barked an order to his remaining guards. Secure the perimeter. Bring him in. But Ethan anticipated this. As the guards advanced, he didn't engage in combat. Instead, he reached down and plucked a handful of discarded charcoal dust from the ground. With a flick of his wrist, he infused the dust with a subtle internal energy, transforming it into a shimmering cloud. The cloud didn't attack, it simply enveloped the guards, subtly manipulating the tension within their clothing, tightening their belts, constricting their joints. They stumbled, disoriented, momentarily paralyzed by an invisible pressure. You see? Ethan said, his voice laced with quiet triumph. Your warriors are just as vulnerable as any garment. And your control, it's built on arrogance, on the assumption that you can dominate something you don't understand. Talia stepped forward, offering him a small, smooth stone, a polished piece of jade shed found amongst the rubble. Let this be a reminder, she said, her voice soft but firm. That power isn't about dominance. It's about understanding. About respect. As Ethan accepted the stone, a subtle shift occurred in the air. The blue light that now subtly pulsed beneath his skin intensified, and the remnants of the shattered vibroblade began to levitate, swirling around him in a silent vortex of manipulated tension. A testament to the incredible power he now possessed, a power that had been hidden, dormant, and waiting for the opportune moment to be revealed. Chapter 4. The Loom of Resonance. The immediate aftermath of the gala was a whirlwind of opulent chaos. The Vance Guild dreadnoughts, behemoths of polished steel and reinforced silkweave, effectively erased the burned-out market district, their energy beams meticulously clearing debris while simultaneously securing the perimeter. High Chairwoman Viridia Vance, a woman sculpted from glacial efficiency and inherited privilege, knelt in the dust, her face a mask of controlled fury and burgeoning respect, as Ethan delivered his calculated decree. The Mercer family, Jax and Warden Mercer the Elder, were swiftly escorted to the textile vats, the rhythmic churning of hot water a fitting accompaniment to their enforced servitude. The sheer spectacle of it, a textile magnate reduced to scrubbing, his son a ward of the state, was a potent lesson in the precariousness of power. However, the true aftermath wasn't the legal pronouncements or the dramatic punishments. It was the quiet, deliberate process of integration, a process Ethan initiated with a chillingly precise hand. Talia, her face still smudged with charcoal dust, was ushered into a sprawling, sun-drenched workshop within the rebuilt guild headquarters, a space filled with the hushed hum of looms and the meticulous scent of raw silk. It was here, amongst the threads of the future, that Ethan began to lay the foundations for his audacious vision. The guild's innovations were rudimentary, Ethan stated, his voice carrying a measured authority that seemed utterly incongruous with his former guise. They focused on the defense of fabric, on its resistance. I intend to explore its resonance. He gestured to a complex apparatus of interwoven looms and pressure sensors, a device he'd overseen during his months of observation. This, my dear Talia, is a resonance loom. It allows us to not just create fabric, but to feel its inherent vibrations, to understand its potential beyond mere structural integrity. Jax, confined to a vat filled with scalding water and perpetually smelling of bleach, watched the proceedings via a closed-circuit camera, a simmering resentment radiating through the system. His attempts to exert influence through intermediaries, mostly disgruntled factory supervisors, were met with a swift and decisive dismantling. Ethan's control was absolute, not through brute force, but through a subtle, almost imperceptible manipulation of the Guild's infrastructure. The first weeks were a frenzy of experimentation. Ethan, guided by Talia's innate understanding of fabric and design, began weaving fabrics that responded to touch, to sound, even to emotion. They created scarves that shifted color with a wearer's mood, tapestries that pulsed with light, and armor that adjusted its density based on the intensity of the attack. It wasn't simply about manipulating tension. It was about creating a dialogue between the wearer and the fabric itself, a concept that baffled the Guild's aging engineers. "It's unsettling," muttered Mr. Finch, the head of research, a man who hadn't seen a smile in decades. "This resonance, it feels alive." Ethan simply smiled, a rare and unsettling expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Precisely, Mr. Finch. We are not merely making fabric. We are shaping experience." During one particularly intense session, as Talia worked to fine-tune the vibrational properties of a shimmering iridescent cloth, the blue light beneath Ethan's skin pulsed with an almost alarming intensity. The room temperature dropped noticeably. Suddenly, the resonance loom began to vibrate violently, the threads of the cloth twisting and contorting as if possessed. A wave of raw energy surged outwards, knocking Mr. Finch off his feet and throwing tools across the workshop. "Stop!" Ethan commanded, his voice resonating with an unexpected power. The vibration ceased abruptly. The blue light subsided, but the air remained thick with a palpable tension. Talia rushed to his side, concern etched on her face. "Ethan! Are you all right?" He pushed himself upright, brushing off his overalls. "The loom is sensitive. It's still learning to channel my abilities. It seems the energy of this place, the residue of the Gallus destruction, is amplifying its resonance. It's a dangerous feedback loop." As he spoke, a small, intricately woven pouch, one of the Guild's most prized prototypes, detached itself from a nearby table and floated towards him. It pulsed with the same blue light, mirroring the glow beneath his skin. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the fabric. "This isn't just about crafting beautiful things," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "It's about containing chaos." The Guild was built on control, but control isn't always about dominance. Sometimes it's about understanding the flow of things, like the flow of energy within a woven thread. He looked at Talia, a flicker of something akin to understanding in his eyes. "You, Talia, you see the patterns. You understand the rhythm. That's why you are here." He offered her the jade stone head received from her, now glowing faintly. "This is a reminder, not of power, but of balance." Chapter 5. The Weaver's Echo. The following days were a whirlwind of controlled revelation and simmering tension. Ethan, still operating under the guise of Eli, the quiet laundry boy, began subtly demonstrating his abilities. Small, almost imperceptible shifts in the tension of the fabrics he handled, a stubborn knot, untangled with a mere flick of his wrist, a rip in a worn tunic, instantly repaired with impossible speed, the sheen of a silk scarf intensifying with a barely there gesture. He kept these displays minimal, acutely aware of the need to maintain the illusion, but the ripple effects were undeniable. The factory workers, initially wary, began to whisper about Ellis' touch, attributing the impossible repairs to a blessing from the spirits of the cloth. Jax, predictably, took offense. The constant demonstrations, coupled with Ethan's unsettling silence and unnervingly precise movements, fueled his rage. He increased the harassment, deliberately spilling buckets of dye on Ethan's clothes, forcing him to endure the most humiliating of tasks, sorting through mountains of refuse, scrubbing the grease from the machinery with a broken brush. He even attempted to capture Ethan, deploying a pair of hulking enforcers to physically restrain him, only to find Ethan effortlessly manipulating the tension of their reinforced leather harnesses, twisting their limbs into uncomfortable angles, leaving them gasping for breath. "You're a ghost, Eli," Jax roared one afternoon, his face flushed with fury, as Ethan meticulously adjusted the stitching on a shipment of shimmering, iridescent broadcloth. "A cursed thing. Trying to steal our power." Ethan didn't meet his gaze. He continued his work, his movements deliberate and focused. "Fabric responds to intention, Warden," he said, his voice low and measured, as if speaking to himself. "It holds memory, and sometimes it holds a defense." The key to understanding Ethan's abilities, Talia realized, lay in his connection to the Loom-Guild's ancient technology. She began to spend her evenings meticulously, studying the Guild's records, painstakingly deciphering the cryptic diagrams and archaic notations within the massive central loom that dominated the Guild's workshop. The loom itself was a behemoth, a cathedral of polished wood and intricate gears, humming with a low, almost sentient energy. She discovered that the Guild's ancestors hadn't simply invented weaving, they had harnessed a forgotten martial art, the knit pulse, a discipline centered around manipulating the structural integrity of textiles with focused energy. The Guild had developed specialized looms resonance looms designed to amplify this power, allowing skilled artisans to weave fabrics capable of incredible strength, resilience, and even, it seemed, a limited form of offensive application. Tonight, fueled by a potent mixture of herbal tea and growing urgency, Talia found herself standing before the central loom, guided by a recently unearthed diagram. The air around the loom shimmered with a faint blue light, a residual echo of the energy unleashed at the gala. She extended her hand, reaching out to the intricate mechanism, feeling the subtle vibrations of the loom resonating with her own energy. Suddenly, a surge of power slammed through her, overwhelming and disorienting. Images flooded her mind, flashes of ancient weavers, their hands moving with impossible speed, channeling energy through threads, creating shields of shimmering fabric, binding enemies with tightened seams. She gasped, staggering backward. Ethan, who had been observing her from a nearby corner, rushed to her side. "The loom is reacting to your inherent connection," he explained, his voice strained. "It's amplifying your potential, but it's also dangerous. The potential for uncontrolled release is substantial." He noticed the jade stone pulsing with a brighter light, and understood. Talia wasn't merely a passive observer. She was a conduit, a natural amplifier for the knit pulse. The Guild's founders had recognized this, selecting individuals with a deep sensitivity to the rhythms of fabric to guide the art. "You are the weaver's echo," Ethan said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "The pattern isn't just in the thread, it's in you." As he spoke, the loom began to operate, independently. Gears spun, shuttles whirred, and vibrant threads flowed from the spindles, weaving a complex pattern, a swirling vortex of blues and silvers. But this wasn't a simple textile, it was a weapon. Jax, alerted by the commotion, stormed into the workshop, followed by his enforcers. He raised his vibroblade, preparing to strike. Ethan didn't move. He simply closed his eyes, focusing on the intricate pattern unfolding on the loom. The blue light intensified, surging outwards, not in a destructive blast, but in a focused wave of tensile force. This time, however, it wasn't just fabric that responded. Jack's vibroblade, forged from the strongest carbon fiber alloys, began to unravel, the intricate threads dissolving into shimmering dust. The shockwave didn't injure Jax, but instead momentarily paralyzed him, freezing him in a statue of bewildered rage. The air crackled with an undeniable power, a testament to the delicate balance now revealed the weaver's touch combined with the warrior's will. The sovereign of the thread and his echo had arrived. Chapter 6. The looms lament the stench of burnt textiles and simmering rage hung heavy in the air, a bitter testament to the night's chaos. The grand gala of shards, meant to herald the launch of Mercer Industries' newest shimmer weave collection, a silk so theoretically impervious to bullets it was nicknamed Dragon's Scale, lay in ruins. The opulent ballroom, normally a swirl of champagne and self-importance, was now littered with shattered crystal, scorched velvet, and the stunned faces of Mercer's elite. Ethan, clad in a simple, freshly laundered tunic provided by Talia, a garment subtly reinforced with threads heads subtly manipulated, offering a ghost of protection, stood before the loom. Now, a silent, gleaming monument to his revealed power. The swirling vortex of blue and silver, the pattern of release as Talia called it, had faded, leaving only a faint, shimmering residue on the massive wooden frame. The rhythmic hum of the loom had ceased, as if exhausted from unleashing such raw force. Jax, still frozen in a tableau of disbelief and fury, was restrained by a contingent of Mercer's security forces, their faces grim. The vibroblade, reduced to shimmering dust, lay at his feet. He wasn't injured, not physically, but the paralysis Ethan had inflicted felt far more profound, a shattering of ego, a glimpse into a reality where his carefully constructed world of power and privilege had been utterly dismantled. Warden Mercer, a man who had spent his entire life cultivating an aura of impenetrable authority, was a picture of brittle composure. He paced before the chaos, issuing terse orders, his voice dripping with venomous disbelief. This is impossible. A laundry boy? Has using some kind of sorcery. It's not sorcery, Father, Talia said, her voice calm, her eyes holding a knowing depth. It's a principle, a discipline. The thread it responds to intention, to pressure, to resonance. She gestured subtly towards the loom, a silent explanation for those who would grasp it. Ethan, aware of the rising tide of suspicion and fear amongst Mercer's men, stepped forward. There is no sorcery, only a deep understanding of material. For generations the Vance Guild has possessed this knowledge, but it remained dormant, hidden. I simply chose to reawaken it. His voice was steady, carrying a quiet confidence that belied the immense power simmering beneath his skin. High Chairwoman Vivian Vance, her face a mask of carefully controlled fury, stepped into the ruined ballroom. The sight of her son, standing amidst the wreckage, his hands previously dismissed as those of a lowly scrubber radiating an almost tangible energy, was a blow to her very core. The decades shed spent building the Vance Guild, meticulously crafting an empire based on industrial dominance and ruthless efficiency, were being challenged by a boy who had chosen to be invisible. "Ethan," she said, her voice laced with icy authority, "explain yourself. This display, this blatant disregard for the established order, demands an explanation." Ethan remained silent for a long moment, allowing the weight of her disapproval to settle over him. Then, he turned to Talia. "She seeks to understand the mechanics. Let her observe." He gestured to a young Mercer apprentice, a wiry boy named Silas, who had been tasked with examining the shattered remains of the vibroblade. "Silas," Ethan said, his voice low and deliberate, "examine the alloy. Note the microscopic fractures. Understand that this blade, created with the most advanced techniques, was simply broken by a force that doesn't rely on brute strength, but on the delicate manipulation of stress." Silas, initially skeptical, cautiously approached the wreckage, his brow furrowed in concentration. He meticulously documented the destruction, painstakingly recording the intricate patterns of fracturing. As he worked, Ethan subtly shifted his focus, subtly influencing the loom. The gears began to turn again, the shuttles whirred, and slowly, deliberately, the pattern of release began to re-emerge this time. A simpler, more controlled design, a miniature depiction of the Shimmer Weave collection itself, woven entirely from shimmering silver thread. Suddenly, a collective gasp rippled through the room. The intricate miniature, pulsating with a faint blue light, was not just a representation of the collection, it was reacting to the fabrics around it. A section of Warden Mercer's expensive silk coat, a sample from the Shimmer Weave collection, began to subtly tighten, a faint, almost imperceptible constriction around the collar. Jax, observing this, felt a jolt of panic. "He's controlling the fabric," he screamed, instinctively reaching for his own uniform. But before he could, Ethan, with a single fluid movement, amplified the tension, causing the straps of Jack's uniform to snap tight, pinning him to the floor with an agonizing pressure. The room fell silent, save for the whirring of the loom and the stifled gasps of the assembled elite. Ethan stood there, a quiet, unassuming laundry boy, wielding a power that dwarfed their wildest imaginations, a sovereign of the thread, and his echo, having just begun to unravel their world. Chapter 7. The looms lament the aftermath of the gala. Even after the mercenaries were subdued, and Mercer's brutal ambitions quelled, hung heavy in the air of the Vance Loom-Guild's rebuilt headquarters. The building itself, a stark contrast of salvaged industrial steel and Talia's exquisitely crafted textile installations, pulsed with a quiet energy. Ethan, still coated in a thin sheen of damp cloth from the Shards event, oversaw the meticulous documentation of the destruction, a grim task that was simultaneously a scholarly exercise and a brutal reminder of the casual cruelty he had been forced to confront. He was no longer just recording the patterns of splintering metal. He was cataloging the fear in the eyes of those who understood the true scope of his power. High Chairwoman Viridia Vance, a woman sculpted from generations of corporate steel and glacial disapproval, circled him, her face a mask of controlled fury and a burgeoning, unnerving respect. "The efficiency, Ethan," she finally said, her voice a measured rasp. "The precision. It's unsettling. The market district was a significant loss. But the disruption, the power you demonstrated, it's a potential weapon." Ethan simply nodded, meticulously adjusting the angle of the camera that captured the miniature Shimmerweave replica. He wasn't interested in weaponizing his abilities, not yet. He was exploring them, understanding the nuances of the knit pulse, the way it responded to stress, to intention, to the very fabric of reality. The miniature was a key, a way to map the limits of his control, a visual representation of the terrifying, beautiful potential contained within his being. Talia, however, was the one who seemed most visibly affected. She'd spent the last few days meticulously studying the miniature, sketching its intricate patterns in a worn, leather-bound notebook, her brow furrowed in intense concentration. The silence of the Design Academy, normally filled with the rhythmic hum of looms and the rustle of fabric, felt charged with her presence. "It's not just a representation, Ethan," she said, her voice low and thoughtful. "It's a conversation. The weave responds to its environment, anticipates it as if the loom itself is lamenting the destruction." That evening, after Viridia had retreated to her private chambers, leaving Ethan to his studies, Talia approached him, carrying a small, intricately woven pouch. "I've been experimenting," she said, offering it to him. "I've incorporated elements of the knit pulse into the pattern. Subtle shifts in tension, micro-adjustments, I call it echo weave." Inside the pouch was a length of shimmering silver thread, the same material used in the Shimmerweave collection. As Ethan touched it, a ripple of energy flowed through him, a harmonious echo of the power he'd felt at the gala. The miniature in the room pulsed brighter, its blue light intensifying. Suddenly, the air around them began to vibrate. The gears of the main loom, silent for weeks, word to life, a low, rhythmic drone that resonated through the building. The shuttle began to weave, not a planned pattern, but a chaotic, swirling vortex of silver thread. "Stop it, Talia!" Ethan shouted, attempting to disrupt the flow. But it was too late. The vortex expanded, consuming the miniature shimmer-weave replica. Simultaneously, fabrics throughout the room, a velvet drape, a silk scarf, even Viridia's impeccably tailored uniform began to subtly tighten, the sensation described by everyone present as a disconcerting pressure against their skin. Jax, who had been kept as a wary observer in a small, reinforced observation room, watched the scene unfold through a reinforced glass panel. His face, previously contorted with panic, now registered a chilling realization. He didn't understand how it was happening, but he understood the consequence. "The Sovereign has expanded his reach," he screamed, pounding on the glass. "He's controlling everything." Ethan, amidst the chaos, remained calm, focusing his energy. He wasn't fighting the weave, he was guiding it, channeling the knit pulse to unravel the unintended consequences of the echo weave. The shimmering silver threads began to retract, the pressure subsided, and the loom fell silent once more. Viridia, alerted by the commotion, rushed into the room, her face tight with fury. "What have you done, Ethan?" Ethan simply met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I'm learning," he said quietly, his voice imbued with the strange authority of the Sovereign of the Thread. "And I'm learning that control isn't about force, but about understanding, about listening to the lament of the loom." He picked up a small piece of the recovered miniature, its surface shimmering with residual energy. "This," he said, holding it up for Viridia to see, "is not a weapon. It's a key to understanding the heart of creation, and the devastating potential within even the most beautiful things." Chapter 8, The Looms, Echo the Aftermath of the Grand Gala, was a carefully constructed tableau of stunned disbelief and simmering rage. Warden Mercer, bruised and humiliated, sat in a holding cell, a damp cloth pressed to his throbbing head. Jax, still consumed by a barely contained fury, was interrogated relentlessly by Viridia's agents, his frantic accusations of sorcery and fabric manipulation echoing through the opulent corridors of the Vance Guild headquarters. Ethan, meanwhile, was finding himself a reluctant figure of fascination. Had established a temporary office, a small, surprisingly clean corner within the Guild's vast archives, and spent his days meticulously examining the wreckage of Mercer's ambition. He wasn't seeking to gloat, merely to understand. Had discovered, through a painstaking study of ancient textile records, that the knit pulse wasn't a newly invented martial art. It had been practiced, in a far more primal form, by legendary artisans of the Celestial dynasty, masters who could subtly influence the very fibers of their creations, guiding them into perfect shapes, sensing flaws before they manifested. It was a technique of resonance, of feeling the inherent tension within a material and subtly manipulating it, a skill he realized with a chilling clarity that had been dormant within his bloodline for centuries. The reinforced observation room, where Jax had been monitored, became a focal point of intrigue. Viridia, still radiating controlled fury, ordered its thorough analysis. They discovered a faint residue of the tension state imprinted on the glass, a disconcerting pressure against the surface, a visual distortion that suggested the fabric itself had momentarily warped space. It confirmed what Jax had initially dismissed as impossible. Ethan wasn't just skilled with textiles, he was actively shaping reality through them. As the technicians worked, Viridia cornered Ethan, her voice laced with a dangerous edge. "You've demonstrated an incredible power, Ethan. Don't. A dangerous one. We need to understand it, control it. We'll be isolating you, conducting experiments. No more wandering around scrubbing floors." Ethan simply tilted his head, his expression devoid of emotion. "Control isn't always about containment, Viridia. Sometimes it's about understanding the source of the power. The Weaver's Song, as the ancients called it. He gestured towards the miniature recovered from the shattered vibroblade, the Echo Weave, now housed in a protective casing. This isn't a weapon, not truly. It's a fragment of the loom itself, resonating with the knit pulse. By analyzing it, we can understand the full potential of this connection. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the archive. Not a physical tremor, but a shift in the very air, a subtle distortion in the light. The Echo Weave began to glow with an intensified silver light, emitting a low hum that vibrated through Ethan's bones. He instinctively reached out, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns on the miniature. "The loom, it's reacting," he murmured, his voice laced with a nascent understanding. "It's trying to communicate." As he focused, images flooded his mind, fleeting visions of ancient artisans at work, their hands moving with impossible grace as they shaped silk, linen, and wool. He saw vast, subterranean workshops filled with the rhythmic clatter of looms, the scent of dyes and starches hanging heavy in the air. He witnessed the birth of weave armor not as a weapon but as a testament to precision, durability, and the inherent beauty of natural fibers. He understood then that the knit pulse wasn't just a combat technique. It was a philosophy, a way of interacting with the world, a way of listening to the silent language of the loom. Jax, witnessing this, shrieked again, his hysteria escalating. As being controlled. The weaver's song is influencing him. It's a trap. But Ethan wasn't responding to Jack's fear. He was deep in conversation with the loom, guided by its ancient wisdom. He extended his hand, not to attack, but to gently touch the miniature. As his fingertips brushed against the shimmering threads, the room filled with an extraordinary pressure, a feeling of immense, almost unbearable tension. Then, with a sudden jarring movement, the miniature pulsed with light, projecting a holographic image before them, a towering loom, crafted from obsidian and silver, its mechanisms moving with hypnotic fluidity. From the loom emerged a spectral figure, an ancient weaver, radiating a serene, almost ethereal light. "The loom seeks balance." The weaver's voice echoed through the room, ancient and resonant. "The fabric of reality is woven with threads of creation and destruction. To manipulate it without understanding is to invite chaos." The image faded, leaving Ethan drained but profoundly changed. He turned to Viridia, his gaze clear and resolute. "I've learned a vital lesson. The true power of the knit pulse isn't about destruction. It's about preservation. It's about ensuring that the loom's song continues to guide our creations, to protect us from the shadows that lurk within even the most beautiful things." He looked at the Echo Weave in his hand, a faint smile playing on his lips. "The sovereign of the thread doesn't seek to dominate. He seeks to harmonize." Chapter 9. The Loom's Resonance. The aftermath of the Grand Gala of Shards settled like a bruised velvet over the city. The Mercer militia, humiliated and scattered, were being rounded up, and the whispers of the sovereign of the thread, a name now synonymous with terrifying power, circulated through the slick, neon-lit alleys of the lower districts. Ethan, no longer a mute laundry boy, moved with a quiet authority, a subtle tension radiating from him that made the security barons of the city instinctively lower their voices. His mother, High Chairwoman Vivian Vance, had orchestrated a carefully constructed tableau of shame kneeling in the mud, publicly acknowledging her son's unprecedented power, a calculated display of vulnerability designed to appease the anxieties of the global elite. But the true strategic move wasn't the public humiliation, it was the acquisition. The Vance Guild, fueled by the sudden, almost effortless control of the city's textile infrastructure, had consolidated its holdings with terrifying speed. Within 48 hours, Mercer's luxury mills, the factories churning out weave armor for the world's militaries and the wardrobes of its wealthiest citizens, were under Vance control. Ethan, however, wasn't interested in simply stripping Mercer of his assets. He was focused on the loom, on the echoes of the weaver's warning. had spent the intervening days sequestered in a newly constructed chamber within the rebuilt Vance Tower, a stark contrast to the grime and sweat of his previous existence. The room was dominated by the miniature obsidian and silver loom, painstakingly recreated from the holographic projection. It hummed with a subtle energy, a constant, rhythmic pulse that seemed to resonate with Ethan's own heartbeat. Viridia, the augmented intelligence had inadvertently created, occupied the space beside him, a shimmering cascade of data overlaid on the physical world. "The loom's resonance is increasing, Master Vance," Viridia reported, her voice a cool, synthesized murmur. "It is responding to your refinement. You've begun to understand the threads not as instruments of destruction, but as conduits for creation and balance." "It's not understanding, Viridia," Ethan said, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns on the miniature loom. "It's remembering. The loom has existed for millennia, interwoven into the very fabric of this world. It's not simply a tool, it's a guardian. It's correcting a fundamental imbalance, a slow, insidious corruption that has been bleeding into the creation process for centuries." Jax Mercer predictably refused to concede. Had been confined to a damp, windowless cell in the bowels of the Vance Tower, a prisoner of the sovereign of the thread. He continued to rant about betrayal, about a cursed heir wielding a power he didn't deserve, fueled by a perverse sense of righteous indignation. "You're a puppet, Vance," he screamed through the reinforced steel bars. "You think you're controlling the loom, but you're merely playing a part in its grand design. The Weaver will punish you." Ethan ignored him. He was engrossed in a task Viridia had identified, strengthening the weave anchor, a network of vibrational nodes woven into the very foundations of the city, designed to stabilize the structural integrity of the woven fabric that constituted the city's energy grid. The original design, discovered through the loom, was intended to mitigate the destabilizing effects of uncontrolled technological advancement, a preventative measure against the very chaos Jax so vehemently feared. Suddenly, the loom surged with power. The obsidian and silver mechanism spun with impossible speed, projecting a new holographic image, a colossal, collapsing city, its buildings dissolving into shimmering threads. The Weaver's voice echoed, sharper, more urgent. "The corruption deepens. The threads of discord are unraveling reality. You must reinforce the anchor, Master Vance, or the city and all that it contains will be consumed." Ethan focused, channeling his knit pulse, not towards destruction, but towards construction. He manipulated the fibers of the miniature loom, weaving a lattice of protective energy around the holographic city, reinforcing its stability. The room vibrated violently, pushing him back against the wall. Viridia screamed warnings, analyzing the complex patterns of energy flow, while the loom resonated with a power that threatened to overwhelm him. He realized with a jolt that the Weaver's warning wasn't just about Jack's fear-mongering, it was about a deeper, more fundamental threat. The lint on the fabric of society wasn't merely social commentary, it was a palpable force, a spreading decay that was actively tearing at the very structure of reality. As he continued to weave, he noticed a subtle shift in the loom's projection. A single crimson thread, initially obscured, now dominated the holographic city. It pulsed with an unnerving energy, a vortex of destruction focused on the heart of the weave anchor. "The source," Viridia whispered, her voice filled with a chilling urgency. "The anchor is not protecting against chaos, Master Vance. It's containing it. And something is actively feeding the corruption." Chapter 10. The loom's echo. The rain in the sub-city of Viridia hadn't stopped. It hammered against the corrugated iron roofs, a relentless, mournful percussion accompanying the unsettling hum emanating from the Vance Loom-Guild's core. Ethan, clad now in a surprisingly supple tunic woven from a new, incredibly durable silk, a prototype had secretly sourced from the Guild's advanced labs, stood before the holographic projection of Viridia, the shimmering city model, now marred by the persistent crimson thread. Viridia's projections flickered, displaying intricate energy flows, mathematical equations that swam before Ethan's eyes with dizzying complexity. "The crimson thread is accelerating, Master Vance," she reported, her voice clipped and precise. "It's not just a concentration of chaotic energy, it's actively evolving. It's learning." Jax Mercer, his face a mask of bruised fury and simmering rage, stood behind Ethan, flanked by a contingent of the Guild's elite security forces, genetically enhanced operatives known as thread binders, their bodies subtly laced with specialized fibers designed to amplify and manipulate the knit pulse. They looked utterly, terrifyingly out of place amongst the grime and the despair of the sub-city. "You're still playing games, Vance," Mercer snarled, his voice thick with suppressed venom. "You think you can simply weave your pretty little fantasies and solve this? This isn't a child's plaything, this is the future of reality. It's a future built on exploitation and unsustainable consumption, Warden," Ethan replied, his voice calm, deliberately devoid of emotion. "And your future is consuming itself." He gestured towards the crimson thread, now almost fully integrated into the holographic city, warping the towers of Viridia into grotesque, pulsating shapes. This thread isn't just feeding the chaos, it's feeding on the weave anchor's power. Suddenly the loom, a behemoth of polished steel and woven energy, shuddered violently. The holographic city dissolved momentarily into static, replaced by a fleeting image of vast, cavernous space filled with impossible geometries, shimmering with a nauseating, iridescent light. Ethan felt a searing pain lance through his temples, a disorientation so profound he nearly collapsed. "The Weaver's Echo!" Viridia shouted, her voice rising above the loom's frantic hum. "It's attempting to communicate, Master Vance. The thread, it's a fragment of a higher dimensional consciousness, a predator feeding on the inherent instability within the weave anchor." The loom stabilized, the holographic city reforming, but the crimson thread pulsed with a newfound urgency, now laced with intricate, glyph-like patterns. Ethan realized with a sickening clarity that the Weaver's warning hadn't been a simple plea for protection. It had been a desperate assessment of a war being waged on a scale he hadn't comprehended. "I need to isolate the source," Ethan said, his voice tight with concentration. "Viridia, analyze the thread's energy signature. Find its origin point within the holographic city." Viridia worked frantically, manipulating the loom's controls, her fingers dancing across the console with breathtaking speed. "The energy signature is anomalous, Master Vance. It's not originating from any single point within the holographic city. It's being drawn, pulled, towards a focal point and node within the original anchor design." Ethan's eyes narrowed. The original anchor design. The Weaver, a fragmented echo of a long-dead race of reality weavers, had built the anchor to maintain the stability of Viridia, a city literally constructed from layered, interwoven realities. The original design had been lost to time, buried beneath centuries of technological advancement. "Show me the original schematic," he commanded. The loom responded, projecting a complex three-dimensional rendering of the anchor's core, a network of interwoven energy pathways spanning across layers of reality. A single point, highlighted in an eerie, pulsating blue, caught his attention, a node buried deep within the city's foundation. A place long forgotten, a place known only as the Silent Heart. "The Silent Heart," Viridia whispered, her voice laced with dread. "And it's a null point, Master Vance, a place where the weave anchor's energy is thinnest. That's where the thread is feeding." As Ethan focused his knit pulse, he felt an irresistible pull, a compulsion urging him towards the Silent Heart. He could sense the raw, chaotic energy emanating from the crimson thread, like a malignant growth attempting to consume the very fabric of reality. He moved without conscious thought, his body flowing with a power he barely understood, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the Loom-Guild with a speed that defied explanation. He arrived at the Silent Heart, a small, almost insignificant chamber beneath the Loom-Guild's foundations, where the original anchor node lay dormant, encased in a sphere of solidified light. The crimson thread wasn't merely feeding on the node's energy, it was rewriting it, corrupting the core principles of the weave anchor. Jax and his thread binders burst into the chamber, their faces contorted with a terrifying mixture of triumph and fury. "It's over, Vance," Mercer roared, raising his hand to unleash a volley of energy blasts. "You can't stop the unraveling." Ethan didn't respond. He simply extended his hand, and the surrounding stone began to shift, to melt, to flow, becoming a cascade of shimmering, iridescent threads, a living tapestry woven with the very essence of the loom pulse. The crimson thread recoiled, screaming in a silent, agonizing burst of energy. The battle for the heart of Iridia had begun. Chapter 11. The looms lament the air, and the silent heart hung thick with the smell of ozone and something older, something akin to shattered memories. The crimson thread, now contained within a shimmering bubble of woven defense, pulsed with a malevolent light, its silent screams echoing in the damp stone. Mercer and his threadbinders, a dozen of them, stood frozen, their faces pale and slick with sweat, their meticulously crafted vibroblades useless against the living tapestry Ethan had conjured. Jax, predictably, was the first to break the paralysis. "Impossible," he spat, pushing forward with a desperate fury. "The weaver's touch, it shouldn't be possible. This thread, it's a corruption. A breach of the weaver's law." He launched another volley of energy blasts, each one intercepted by swirling ribbons of thread that seemed to anticipate his movements, wrapping around his limbs and momentarily stunning him. Ethan remained unmoved, a calm center within the chaos. He wasn't fighting in the traditional sense. He was conducting, guiding the very fabric of the silent heart, directing the flow of the loom pulse with a focus that bordered on terrifying. The walls of the chamber were being sculpted, not destroyed. Cracked stone became smooth, echoing curves, interwoven with strands of thread that shimmered with an impossible inner light, threads that pulsed with the rhythm of the weave anchor. "You're not a warrior, Vance," Mercer snarled, his voice strained. "You're a thief. You've stolen the weaver's gift and twisted it to your own ends." Ethan finally turned, his expression unreadable beneath the shadowed cowl of his linen shirt. "The weaver's gift was meant to protect, Mercer. You've used it to build empires on the backs of the forgotten. The weave armor you hoard, it's not protection, it's a cage." A single, deliberate movement, and Ethan's hand shot out, not to attack, but to pluck a handful of crimson thread from the pulsing bubble. He wove it into a small, intricate knot, holding it aloft. The knot glowed with a brilliant temporary warmth, then vanished, leaving no trace. "This," he said, his voice low and resonant, "is the lament of the thread that remembers what it should be." The threadbinders, fanatical in their devotion to Mercer's twisted interpretation of the weaver's law, surged forward, attempting to overwhelm him. But Ethan was no longer just a laundry boy. The loom pulse flowed through him, amplified by the silent heart's residual energy, granting him an almost ethereal grace. He moved through their assault like smoke, pulling threads from their uniforms with a casual flick of his wrist, tightening them until their limbs locked, their bodies collapsing in awkward, agonizing heaps. Jax, desperate, activated a device on his wrist, a miniaturized amplifier designed to disrupt a loom pulse. A blinding wave of static erupted, momentarily interfering with Ethan's control. The crimson thread flared, dangerously unstable. He felt a searing pain in his temples, a jarring disconnect from the flow. Suddenly, Talia appeared. Shed followed them, guided by a network of informants Shed cultivated in the city's underbelly. A network of whispers and shadows that extended far beyond the grime of the laundry district. She wasn't armed, but her eyes burned with an unsettling intensity. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice surprisingly powerful. "You're feeding it. You're giving it strength." Her words, imbued with a strange resonance, momentarily disrupted the chaos. The crimson thread recoiled, its pulse weakening. Ethan seized the opportunity, focusing his energy on a single, complex weave, a tapestry of interlocking threads that solidified around Jax, effectively cocooning him in a cage of shimmering silk. Jax thrashed wildly, his vibroblade useless against the living armor. "You'll regret this, Vance," he screamed. "The guild will crush you." Ethan simply raised his hand, and the cocoon pulsed with a gentle, calming light. Jack's struggles gradually subsided, replaced by a look of bewildered resignation. As Jax was restrained, Ethan turned to Talia, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "You saved me, Talia. You saved the Silent Heart." "I simply followed the thread," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "It led me to you." Then, with a subtle shift of his hand, Ethan wove a final intricate pattern into the crimson thread, effectively neutralizing its corrupting influence. The pulsating bubble dissipated, leaving behind only a faint shimmering residue. The Silent Heart, its core stabilized, pulsed with a renewed, clear energy, a testament to Ethan's skill and Talia's intuition. The battle for now was won. But Ethan knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. The unraveling hadn't stopped it, had merely been contained, waiting for a chance to begin anew. Chapter 12. The Loom of Resonance. The rain in the subterranean city had a peculiar quality, a metallic tang, a residue of the energy fluctuations that simmered beneath the layered concrete and steel. It clung to the damp alleys of the lower wards, mirroring the persistent feeling of unease that settled over Ethan Vance. He hadn't anticipated the sheer volume of attention his abrupt reveal had generated. The guild's arrival hadn't been a calculated, surgical strike. It had been a tidal wave of bureaucratic force, a demonstration of power so overwhelming it silenced even the most vocal critics. High Chairwoman Lyra Vance, a woman sculpted from cold steel and inherited privilege, was particularly fascinated. She moved with the unnerving precision of a predator observing its prey, her gray eyes never quite meeting Ethan's. The initial display of control, the dismantling of Mercer's militia, the silencing of Jax had been meticulously orchestrated, designed to project an image of restoration and righteous retribution. But Lyra wasn't interested in public perception. She was interested in understanding the mechanism of her son's power. "The knit pulse," she murmured, examining a recovered vibroblade fragment with a detached, almost clinical curiosity, "is a remarkable adaptation of ancient techniques. But your control it surpasses anything recorded in the Crimson Scrolls." Ethan remained impassive, meticulously folding a freshly laundered shift, a simple gray cotton, carefully woven with threads he subtly manipulated to increase its tensile strength. He felt like a trapped insect under Lyra's scrutiny, a puzzle she was determined to solve. He knew revealing too much, even to his own mother, was a dangerous game. The guild's methods were notoriously ruthless, prioritizing profit above all else. "It's a matter of perception," he finally said, his voice low, almost hesitant, a deliberate echo of the mute boy shed initially dismissed. "Fabric responds to intention. It is, in essence, a conduit for the will." Lyra nodded slowly, a flicker of something akin to understanding crossing her face. "And you, Ethan, are a master conduit. The guild will utilize this. We will refine it, weaponize it. Imagine entire battalions clad in dynamically adjustable armor, capable of deflecting projectiles, manipulating the flow of battle. The possibilities are staggering." Around them, the Vance Guild's engineers, a collection of pale, obsessed specialists, were already poring over the recovered wreckage, meticulously dissecting the crimson thread that had powered Jack's vibroblade. They were attempting to replicate the effect, to isolate the resonance that allowed Ethan to manipulate the fabric's structural integrity. Talia, now a key figure in the burgeoning Vance Guild design division, watched with a guarded apprehension. Shed witnessed Lyra's ruthlessness firsthand, the way she could dismantle a colleague with a single, well-placed word. Yet, she also sensed a certain respect, a grudging acknowledgement of Ethan's abilities. "The Guild's approach is brute force," Talia said to Ethan, as they were momentarily separated from the observation hub. "They seek to understand the mechanics, to replicate the effect. You, however, seem to be connected to the fabric itself." Ethan paused, considering her words. "It's more than mechanics, Talia. It's about harmony. The fabric exists in a state of constant tension, a delicate balance. When that balance is disrupted by anger, by fear, by corrupted intent, it becomes a weapon. I simply learned to restore that balance." He reached out, instinctively touching a nearby bolt of shimmering charcoal-gray silk, a prototype for a new combat weave. "This fabric, it wants to be strong, but it also wants to be free. It yearns for equilibrium." Suddenly, the sensors in the observation hub shrieked. Alarms blared, bathing the room in a pulsating red light. "Anomaly detected," a technician yelled, his voice strained with panic. "High-frequency vibrations localized near Sector 7. Readings are off the charts." Lyra's face hardened. "Jax," she said, her voice laced with ice. "It seems our little experiment attracted unwanted attention. Bring him in." As security forces moved to apprehend Jax, a surge of raw energy erupted from the depths of Sector 7, the abandoned textile district where Mercer had attempted to establish his illegal silk processing facilities. The crimson thread, dormant for weeks, was stirring once more. Ethan reacted instinctively, moving with a speed that belied his unassuming appearance. He didn't attempt to confront the security forces directly. Instead, he focused on the surrounding structures, the crumbling brick walls, the rusted iron girders, the piles of discarded fabric. With a single fluid movement, he began to weave a complex pattern, a living tapestry of tensile energy that solidified around him, creating a shimmering shield. The security forces, caught completely off guard, were overwhelmed by the sheer force of his power. The buildings themselves seemed to respond to his will, the concrete groaning and shifting, the metal groaning as Ethan manipulated its structural integrity. Jax, pinned beneath a collapsing wall of fabric, screamed in impotent rage, "You're playing a dangerous game, Vance! You're unleashing something you cannot control." Ethan's eyes, usually guarded, burned with a fierce intensity. "I am controlling it, Jax," he said, his voice resonating with a surprising power. "I am simply restoring balance to the loom of resonance." He raised his hand, and the crimson thread, no longer contained, spiraled outwards, seeking to reconnect with its source, a source that Ethan was beginning to realize wasn't simply a weapon, but a force of creation, a force capable of both immense beauty and devastating destruction. The battle wasn't over. It had merely begun. Chapter 13. The weavers lament the air in the abandoned textile district, still shimmered with residual energy, a faint, echoing vibration that tugged at Ethan's senses. The remnants of Mercer's militias lay scattered, stunned and subdued, their advanced combat gear rendered useless by the sovereign of the thread. High Chairwoman Lyra Vance, a woman sculpted from granite and regret, stood before him, her face a mask of calculated disappointment. The sight of her, kneeling in the dust amidst the wreckage of her empire, was a stark reminder of the colossal deception she had perpetuated. "You have displayed a remarkable aptitude, Ethan," she said, her voice carefully measured. "A dangerous aptitude. The knit pulse is a relic of a forgotten age, a power meant to be contained, not unleashed." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He was absorbing the scene, calculating the damage, gauging the reactions of the few remaining witnesses. He felt a deep weariness, not just from the exertion of manipulating the very structure of the city, but from the realization that his entire life had been a carefully constructed fabrication. His father hadn't been a respected inventor, had been a suppressed guardian, a last line of defense against a power he desperately tried to control. The loom of resonance, it wasn't a weapon, It was a responsibility, a burden head unknowingly inherited. "You speak of containment," Ethan finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "But containment implies a need for control. I don't seek to control the loom. I seek to understand it, and to ensure it never falls into the wrong hands." He glanced at Jax, still sputtering beneath the salvaged remains of a reinforced awning, and added, "A lesson perhaps in restraint, Mr. Mercer." The high chairwoman signaled to the guards, who efficiently began to haul Jax and the remaining mercenaries away. "A fitting punishment," she observed, her gaze fixed on Ethan. 30 years in the boiling vats. A humbling experience, wouldn't you say? As the guards dragged Jax away, he managed one last venomous utterance. "You'll regret this, Vance. You've awakened a sleeping dragon." Ethan ignored him. His attention was drawn to Talia, who had cautiously approached, her face etched with a mixture of awe and profound concern. She hadn't spoken since the gala, only offering him a small, tightly folded cloth, a comforting gesture of the kind she usually reserved for the orphans. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What was that?" He knelt beside her, carefully removing the cloth. "It's called the knit pulse, Talia. It's the ability to manipulate the structural tension of fabric. To, in essence, become the fabric itself." Talia's eyes widened. "But why? Why did you do that?" "Because someone was about to destroy the only home you had," he replied, gesturing towards the orphanage, rebuilt from salvaged materials and fueled by the guild's discarded threads. Mercer's ambition was not merely about profit. It was about annihilation. He then turned his attention to the devastation around them. The sheer scale of the damage, the destruction of a thriving, albeit illicit, community, settled heavily on him. He realized that simply punishing Mercer wouldn't be enough. The damage was done, the trust broken. "The Guild," he declared, his voice gaining strength, "will not simply rebuild the industrial zone. It will be rebuilt as a center for innovation, a place where creativity and craftsmanship are valued, not exploited." He turned to Talia. "And you, Talia, will be its creative director." Her reaction was immediate and overwhelming. You would offer me that." "You saw the gold in a laundry boy's silence," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Now, let the world wear your vision." He pulled out a small, intricately woven bracelet a prototype had been working on in secret, a garment that responded to the wearer's emotional state, shifting color and texture. "This is a starting point," he explained, offering it to her. "A demonstration of what is possible. I want you to teach me how to translate this power into something beautiful, something beneficial, something that doesn't rely on force." As Talia accepted the bracelet, a vibrant spectrum of colors rippled across its surface, reflecting the emotions swirling within her: disbelief, gratitude, and a burgeoning sense of purpose. She touched the bracelet, and the colors intensified, swirling into intricate patterns. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air. The crimson thread, dormant since the gala, began to pulse with an almost palpable energy. Ethan felt a surge of awareness, a connection to something vast and ancient. He realized that the loom of resonance wasn't just a power he could wield, it was a consciousness, a network of interwoven possibilities. He wasn't simply controlling the fabric, he was being guided by it. He looked at Talia, who was staring at him with an expression of profound understanding. "The awakening," he murmured, "is complete, and I fear it has only just begun." Chapter 14. The Loom of Resonance. The humming intensified, vibrating through the foundations of the newly established Design Academy, a low thrum that resonated within Talia's bones. The crimson thread of the bracelet, now a living current of color, spiraled outward, tracing patterns across the walls, geometric designs that shifted and reformed with breathtaking speed, echoing the rhythmic pulses of Ethan's heart. He felt a pressure building behind his eyes, a sensation not of pain, but of being read, understood with an intimacy that bordered on unsettling. "It's magnificent," Talia whispered, her fingers still delicately tracing the swirling patterns on the bracelet. The fabric responded to her touch, shifting from a calm sapphire to a vibrant turquoise, then blossoming into shades of amethyst and rose. "It's not just manipulating tension, is it? It's communication?" Ethan nodded, his expression grave. "The loom of resonance. It's far older than the guild, older than the empires that rose and fell around it. The Vance family weren't its original custodians, you see. They merely stumbled upon its potential, learning to channel its power through a specific martial art, knit pulse. But the loom itself, it's a consciousness, a vast repository of woven knowledge accumulated over millennia. It seeks to harmonize, to balance, to guide. And it has chosen me." He demonstrated, his movements fluid and deliberate, almost hypnotic. He picked up a discarded bolt of indigo silk, the color of a twilight sky. With a subtle shift in his posture, a barely perceptible flexing of his muscles, the indigo began to flow, swirling like smoke, forming intricate knots and braids that defied gravity. He sculpted it into a miniature dragon, scales shimmering with a faint internal light, before releasing it back into the roll. "The loom is teaching me," he explained, his voice barely audible above the thrumming, "how to perceive the inherent patterns within everything. The structural integrity of a building, the flow of energy through a human body, the very weave of reality itself. And more importantly, how to apply that understanding not for destruction, but for creation." Suddenly, the air shimmered. The colors of the bracelet intensified, bathing the entire academy in an ethereal glow. The crimson thread pulsed with such force that it seemed to physically bend light. Then, with a low groan, a section of the far wall, a solid expanse of reinforced concrete, began to unravel. Not with shattering force, but with a graceful, almost deliberate separation of fibers, revealing not empty space, but a swirling vortex of raw, unspun thread. "The loom, it's manifesting," Ethan said, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "It's expanding its reach, weaving new possibilities into existence." Before either of them could react, a voice, ancient and resonant, filled the room. It wasn't spoken aloud, but directly implanted into their minds, a chorus of whispers woven together from countless voices. "The patterns are fractured. The balance is lost. You, Threadwalker, are the key to restoring harmony. But beware, for the echoes of dissonance still linger, seeking to corrupt the weave." Jax Mercer, predictably, arrived with a squad of his mercenaries, alerted by a frantic message relayed by a compromised contact. He burst through the shimmering portal, weapon drawn, a sleek, matte black energy pistol, his face contorted with rage. "Thought you could hide from us, boy," he snarled, scanning the room with a disdainful gaze. "I'll carve you apart, just like I carved out the slums." But Ethan didn't meet his gaze. He stood calmly amidst the swirling colors, the bracelet pulsing on his wrist, the loom of resonance visibly manifesting around him. The room transformed, becoming a kaleidoscopic tapestry of interwoven fabrics, shimmering with impossible textures and hues. The mercenaries paused, their weapons trained on Ethan, but they seemed disoriented, hesitant, as if struggling to comprehend the reality before them. Then, with a sudden intuitive movement, Ethan reached out and plucked a length of crimson thread from the air. He wove it into a shimmering shield, not of solid fabric, but of pure, concentrated energy, deflecting Jack's initial volley of shots. "You think brute force can stop the loom?" Ethan asked, his voice calm, yet laced with an unsettling power. "You think mere muscle can withstand the will of a conscious weave?" As he spoke, the fabric of the room began to respond to his intent. Loose threads snapped taut, forming razor-sharp tendrils that lashed out, binding Jack's mercenaries with intricate, almost sentient knots. Their energy weapons sputtered, overloaded by the chaotic energy field. Jack's, Enraged, lunged forward, attempting to force his way through the defense. As he did, Ethan didn't strike. He simply focused his attention on the very fabric of Jack's uniform, tightening the stitching, constricting his muscles, effectively immobilizing him in a cage of compressed tension. "The reckoning," Ethan murmured, turning to Talia, his expression now resolute. "It truly has only just begun." The crimson bracelet burned with a blinding light, and in that instant, the loom of resonance, fully awakened, reached out beyond the confines of the academy, a silent, unstoppable force woven into the very fabric of the world. Chapter 15. The looms echoed the rain in the subterranean city of Viridia. Hadn't stopped since the grand gala of shards. It hammered against the corrugated iron roofs of the repurposed textile factories, a mournful rhythm accompanying the unsettling stillness that had settled over the district. The remnants of Mercer's militia lay sprawled across the muddy square, a silent testament to Ethan's revelation, or, as Mercer's loyalists bitterly whispered, a grotesque mockery of justice. Ethan, clad in a simple charcoal-gray tunic head commissioned from Talia, stood overlooking the scene. He hadn't sought glory, hadn't craved recognition, yet the air thrummed with the residual energy of the loom, a low, insistent hum that resonated within him, a constant reminder of the power Head unknowingly carried for decades. Talia, her face pale but resolute, was overseeing the dismantling of Jack's vibro-blade collection, each shattered piece meticulously catalogued and analyzed. "The dissonance is remarkable," Talia observed, studying a particularly complex fragment. "The way he manipulated the harmonics, the sheer force contained within such a delicate instrument. It's almost as if he was playing with a song." Ethan nodded, a rare flicker of a smile touching his lips. "The loom doesn't simply fight, Talia. It responds. It mirrors. It corrects. Fabric, at its core, is a system of tension, a conversation of force." Suddenly, a tremor ran through the ground. Not a violent shake, but a subtle vibration, like a plucked string. Ethan immediately recognized it. The loom was resonating, extending its reach, testing the boundaries of its influence. "It's active," he murmured, his eyes narrowing. Jax wasn't simply arrogant. He sensed it. He sensed a counterpoint. From the edges of the square, figures began to appear. Initially, they were just shadows, indistinct and blurry. But as the loom amplified its energy, they solidified Mercer's remaining security force, augmented by mercenaries from the outer districts, all armed with a bewildering array of weaponry, from pulse rifles to archaic crossbows. They moved with a panicked, disorganized chaos, their aim erratic, their movements hampered by the subtle, unseen forces at play. A young guard, barely more than a boy, raised his pulse rifle and fired a burst at Ethan. The bullets, designed to pierce armored plating, instead dissolved into shimmering threads, violently unraveling before impact. A wave of tightened, almost suffocating pressure washed over the guard, and he collapsed, his muscles seizing, his breathing ragged. "The loom isn't interested in destruction," Ethan said, his voice gaining a subtle steeliness. "It's interested in balance. It seeks to return things to their rightful tension." He turned to Talia, his expression urgent. "The initial surge has drawn attention. We need to understand its parameters, its range. This isn't a weapon to be wielded, it's a language." As he spoke, he reached out, instinctively, and began to manipulate the fabric of the surrounding buildings, a crumbling brick wall, a tattered awning, a pile of discarded rags. Threads of gray and brown coalesced, flowing around his hands, thickening and hardening, forming a protective cocoon that shimmered with a faint internal light. Across the square, Mercer, a hulking man with a scarred face and eyes burning with fury, ordered a full assault. "Kill him! Destroy him! Hez, the architect of our ruin." But the attack faltered. Mercer's men, already disoriented, found their movements further impeded. The threads, seemingly of their own volition, tightened around their weapons, gumming up the mechanisms, rendering them useless. Even their armor, designed to withstand tremendous force, seemed to resist Ethan's influence, as if a fundamental law of physics was fighting against his control. Jax, miraculously unscathed but visibly shaken, observed the unfolding chaos with a cold, calculating gaze. He moved to bring a sonic disruptor to bear, a device designed to shatter molecular bonds, a device Ethan instantly recognized as anathema to the loom. Before Jax could activate the disruptor, Ethan moved with impossible speed. He didn't attack directly. Instead, he focused his attention on the disruptor itself, on the intricate gears and energy conduits within. The loom resonated, and the disruptor began to unravel, its components twisting and distorting, the energy within collapsing in a shower of sparks. "You seek to break the pattern, Mercer," Ethan said, his voice amplified by the loom, echoing across the square. "You seek to impose your will upon the world. But the world is woven, and the loom remembers." As he spoke, the crimson bracelet on his wrist pulsed with an intense light. A shimmering, ethereal thread, radiating a palpable energy, shot out from the bracelet and snaked towards Jax, wrapping around his arm with incredible force. Jax screamed, his body seizing in agony as the loom's power overwhelmed him, a terrifying demonstration of a power far beyond his comprehension. "The reckoning," Ethan murmured, his eyes filled with a profound and unsettling sadness, "has only just begun."